building one of the most dominant empires in children's television history, launching the careers of some of the biggest names in the industry, to being fired by the network he made into a household name, and watching a documentary about him break streaming records. This is how Dan Schneider went from the most powerful man in kids' TV to unemployable, and where things stand now. By the mid-1990s, Dan Schneider was already building something at Nickelodeon that the network hadn't seen before and wouldn't see again. He had started out as an actor, co-starring in the ABC sitcom Head of the Class from 1986 to 1991, and picking up small roles in films throughout the 80s, including the John Cusack cult classic Better Off Dead in 1985. But acting wasn't where he ended up, and by 1993, he'd made the movie to writing and producing. Nickelodeon brought him in to work on a new sketch comedy series for kids called All That, which premiered in 1994. That show ran until 2002, and somewhere in between all of it, Schneider had already started laying the groundwork for what would define the next 2 decades of his career. Back in 1996, he'd founded his own production company called Schneider's Bakery, and from that point forward, everything that came out of it went to #1 on Nickelodeon. Every single show. Zoey 101 started in 2005, and then came iCarly. Episodes in the early seasons were regularly pulling between 5 and 7 million total viewers. In 2010, a single episode posted a 10.7 rating specifically among kids aged 2 to 11, a demographic benchmark that put it at the top of the week across all of cable television for that age group. For context, those are numbers that most cable series aimed at adults would have envied. The show ran for 5 seasons and 109 episodes before ending in 2012. While iCarly was still running, Schneider launched Victorious in 2010. Sam and Cat, a crossover spin-off combining characters from both iCarly and Victorious, followed in 2013. Henry Danger came in 2014, Game Shakers in 2015. The New York Times called him the Norman Lear of children's television. In 2014, Nickelodeon honored him with its first ever Lifetime Achievement Award at the Kids' Choice Awards. He had launched the careers of Miranda Cosgrove, Ariana Grande, Victoria Justice, Drake Bell, Josh Peck, Kel Mitchell, Amanda Bynes, and James Lynn Spears. Nobody at Nickelodeon had more power than Dan Schneider, and by most accounts, nobody had more freedom either. But that combination was going to become a problem. The first sign that something was wrong came earlier than most people realize, and it came from inside the building. During the production of Sam and Cat in 2013, both Jeanette McCurdy and Ariana Grande reportedly made complaints about a producer on the show, which launched a 2013 investigation into inappropriate behavior. The investigation concluded that Schneider, who was the producer McCurdy and Grande had named, had contributed to a toxic environment on the production. The punishment for that conclusion was that he was banned from being on set with the actors for the remainder of the show's run. Sam and Cat was cancelled in 2014 after just 1 season, and even that cancellation was attributed publicly to a scheduling dispute rather than anything related to the investigation. Schneider faced no further consequences from the network. He kept his job, kept his deal, and went on to create 2 more shows, Henry Danger in 2014 and Game Shakers in 2015, both of which went to #1 on Nickelodeon just like everything else he had ever made. Then in 2017, as the #MeToo movement, a global wave of people speaking out about sexual harassment and abuse, was reshaping Hollywood's understanding of what it was willing to tolerate. Nickelodeon's parent company, Viacom CBS, launched another investigation into Schneider's alleged sexual behavior. Former employees described him as a controlling, difficult showrunner, prone to tantrums and angry emails that went out to cast members outside of working hours, including child actors. They described a workplace where women on the writing staff were underpaid, underrepresented, and regularly made uncomfortable. Colleagues told the New York Times they found him temperamental and difficult to work with. Several said they felt uncomfortable when he frequently asked an employee from the costume department for shoulder and neck massages, or texted child actors outside of work hours. In March 2018, Nickelodeon announced that it was ending its partnership with Dan Schneider and his company Schneider's Bakery after 25 years. The joint statement both sides released described it as a natural time to part ways, citing projects winding down. Deadline's concurrent reporting described something different, noting complaints of abusive behavior filed by staff and concerns about Schneider's habit of posting photos of his young female stars' feet on his Twitter account. He reportedly walked away from the network with a $7 million payout. Viacom CBS's investigation had found no evidence of sexual misconduct, but it had found enough evidence of a hostile and degrading workplace environment to end a relationship that had been running for over 2 decades. For about 3 years, Schneider stayed quiet. He gave one interview to the New York Times in 2021, in which he discussed losing over 100 pounds since leaving the network and denied the foot-related allegations as ridiculous, calling the comedy in his shows totally innocent. He said that if people found him hard to work with, it was because he held high standards as a showrunner. But online, the people who had been watching his shows for years were already doing their own accounting. Fan accounts and YouTube channels had started compiling clips from Schneider's various Nickelodeon series, and what they were finding was a pattern that, when viewed all at once, was hard to explain away with the argument that kids find feet funny. There was an episode of Victorious where an entire plot centered on Trina getting her feet treated by a healthcare professional, with the camera lingering on her feet being touched and rubbed while the other characters reacted to it.
Nibble away all of the... Wow, they're really soft.
There was a Sam and Cat Twitter account, which Schneider allegedly controlled, soliciting fans in 2013 to write in the soles of their feet and send in photos so the account could retweet them. There was also behind-the-scenes footage of Schneider sharing what he called foot fun facts about Victorious cast members. His now-deleted Twitter account had a documented history of posting photos of his young actress's feet, which had been public knowledge since at least 2018, when Deadline referenced it in their reporting on his exit. And then there was the broader category of content that fans had started examining frame by frame. The scenes involving teenage girls in Schneider shows that seemed to have been written for an audience that was not children. In Victorious, there was footage of a 16-year-old Ariana Grande's Cat Valentine lying in a bed, writhing and pouring water over her face and chest, a clip that multiple people described using the same word, pornographic.
It's not possible!
There was also a Zoe 101 scene involving goo being squirted onto teenage Jamie Lynn Spears' face at an angle that former writers later confirmed in the Quiet On-Set documentary was not accidental.
All I do is squeeze a little like this.
Former Victorious cast member Daniela Monet, who had played Trina Vega on the show, went on record with Variety in 2022, saying that while most of the show was fine, there were moments she wished hadn't been written the way they were. A former writer and all that, named Kayla Alpert, told Business Insider that on her very first day working for Schneider in the mid-90s, he told her that women were not funny and dared her to name a single funny woman. That comment had never made it into any public story before 2022, and it had been sitting there for almost 30 years. Schneider had denied all of it. His representatives had issued statements pointing out that every script had been approved by network executives, that a standards and practices department had reviewed every episode, and that parents and caregivers had been present on set every day. Former Nickelodeon president of content and production Russell Hicks issued a statement telling outlets that every single thing Schneider did on any of his shows was carefully scrutinized and approved by dozens of involved adults, and that parents and caregivers were watching every single frame of footage and listening to every joke. But none of those denials stopped the picture from getting clearer, and in August 2022, Jeanette McCurdy published a memoir that changed everything that had come before it. Jeanette McCurdy, who had starred as Sam Puckett in both iCarly and Sam and Cat, released her memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died, on August 9, 2022. It sold out at Amazon, Target, and Barnes & Noble within 24 hours of going on sale. It debuted at number 1 on the bestseller list. As of early 2026, it had been on the New York Times paperback nonfiction bestseller list for 16 consecutive weeks, with a 4.43 rating on Goodreads. In the memoir, McCurdy did not name Schneider directly. She referred to him throughout only as the creator, which was his credit in both shows, but an unedited version of an excerpt contained the name Dan, and nobody who read the book was confused about who she was describing. What McCurdy described was a pattern of behavior that stretched across the years she worked for Schneider. She described the creator pressuring her to drink alcohol when she was 18, handing her his glass of whiskey mixed with coffee and telling her the iCarly kids needed to be more like the Victorious cast, edgier and less wholesome. She wanted to say no and couldn't. She described him giving her unwanted shoulder massages in the workplace, but she was too frightened of him to refuse. I want to say something, to tell him to stop. She wrote, but I'm so scared of offending him. She also described him forcing her to reshoot her first on-screen kiss 7 times in a row, and wrote about being put in a bikini for iCarly scenes when she was 15 and how uncomfortable it made her, to the point that it was a contributing factor to the eating disorder she was developing at the time. But the scenes continued regardless. She also wrote about how the creator would use the Victorious cast as a constant comparison against the iCarly cast. And then she mentioned what happened after Sam and Cat ended and her time at the network was wrapping up. Nickelodeon, she wrote, offered her $300,000 as a thank you gift. The condition was that she not talk publicly about her experiences with the creator. She turned the money down. Speaking about it in a book tour, she said she could have used it to fund her niece's education, but that she had chosen a path of integrity instead. McCurdy told the New York Times about the experience through tears. My whole childhood and adolescence were very exploited, she said. It still gives my nervous system a reaction to say it.
Quote, my whole childhood and adolescence were very exploited. It still gives my nervous system a reaction to say it.
The Business Insider investigation that ran around the same time added more accounts from former writers and crew members, going further than the book had. Schneider had campaigned for the skimpier options when it came to costumes for his female cast. He had argued directly with Nickelodeon standards over the length of a teenage actress's skirt, pushing back against the network's request to make it longer. Not one of his shows across his entire career had credited more than 2 female writers in their full run. Zoe 101 and Drake and Josh had credited 0. The longtime writer told Insider that Schneider had once openly stated he didn't like having female writers in the writer's room, something a person close to Schneider denied. Former Zoe 101 actress Alexa Nicholas, who had been publicly vocal about her experiences for years, told Insider that Schneider had once screamed at her until she broke down in tears, that his sets were traumatizing, and that he would regularly take photos with teenage actresses sitting on his lap. Later that same year, Nicholas organized a protest outside Nickelodeon's Burbank headquarters and publicly stated that she had not felt safe around Dan Schneider while working for him. One former writer described the environment under Schneider to Insider as a maddening, disgusting, controlling little bubble. The book rearranged the case. Suddenly, everything that had seemed like isolated internet rumors had a shape, a source, and a name attached to it. And the public reaction made clear that an enormous number of people who had grown up watching these shows had been carrying some version of the same discomfort for years, just waiting for someone to say it first. As one person said, "I know this isn't anything new, but my God, I'm often surprised by how little restraint he had in this show in particular. Some of the stuff in here are hard to believe are actually real." And that was all before the documentary. Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV premiered on Investigation Discovery and Max on March 17 and 18, 2024. The 5-part documentary series was produced with Sony Pictures Television and Business Insider, and it was built around interviews with former Nickelodeon writers, actors, and crew members who had worked on Schneider's shows. In the week it premiered, Nielsen recorded 1.25 billion minutes of viewing, which was the best single-week performance in Max's history at that point, surpassing the previous record that had been set by The Last of Us in early 2023. The documentary about a children's television producer broke the streaming record on its own platform in its debut week. The series covered the arc of Schneider's time at Nickelodeon in order, starting with all that and building forward, and what it laid out was not a single incident or a single bad actor. It was a culture, built over decades, that had protected him at every turn. Former All That cast members, including Giovanni Samuels and Brian Hearn, came forward in the documentary to describe certain content that had been made to perform on the show, and spoke about how it felt to perform that material in front of audiences.
Was a peanut butter scenario. He put peanut butter all over my body and then had probably a dozen dogs run in and lick the peanut butter.
You would walk on his back.
Well, yeah, you know, like, hey, can you walk on my back real quick? Like, I gotta get this kink out.
Peck wrote in her scrapbook, "Thanks for walking on my back."
Then the documentary moved into what happened to the female writers in Schneider's room, and that portion of the series was something a lot of viewers weren't prepared for. 2 writers named Christy Stratton and Jenny Killigan had been the only female writers in the first season of The Amanda Show, the sketch comedy series Schneider created for Amanda Bynes in 1999. They described being hired with the condition that they split a single writer's salary between them, something their male colleagues were not asked to do. When the Writers Guild discovered the arrangement, Schneider allegedly called Killigan and told her she would never work again if he found out she had been the one to speak up about it. The documentary also covered what happened in that writer's room day to day. Killigan described Schneider sending instant messages to female staff members during the workday, instructing them to scream words out loud. It started with things like hammers and went quickly to "I'm an idiot" and worse, with the messages resent in all caps if the person didn't comply fast enough. Killigan mentioned him playing pornography on his computer in the writer's room and offering to include a sketch in the show in exchange for a message. He'd always present it like a joke, she said, but you always felt like disagreeing with Dan or standing up for yourself could result in you getting fired. The worst incident, Killigan said, was the day Schneider interrupted Stratton mid-pitch in the writer's room and told her to lean over the table and act as if she was being sodomized while she told the story. Stratton initially said no, but he pushed until she did it. She couldn't get out of it, Killigan said. It was probably the wrongest thing I'd ever seen happen to a woman in a professional environment. When the documentary's producers asked Stratton about the incident directly, she declined to comment on it. Killigan had previously sued Nickelodeon and Schneider for gender discrimination, settling for an undisclosed amount. She said the lawsuit effectively ended her career in television writing. The documentary also addressed on camera the content that fans had been compiling and debating online for years. The goo scenes, the foot segments, the upside-down water scene with Ariana Grande. Mark Summers was a longtime host of Double Dare, one of Nickelodeon's most iconic game shows, which meant he was someone who had spent years inside the same network Schneider had dominated. The documentary showed him footage from one of Schneider's shows and captured his reaction in real time, before he abruptly withdrew from the project, saying he had been misled about what it was. But the moment that stopped everything was episode 3. Drake Bell, who had starred in Drake and Josh and The Amanda Show, came forward to reveal that he was the unnamed victim in the 2003 child sexual abuse case against Brian Peck. Peck had been a dialogue coach on Nickelodeon Productions, working directly on The Amanda Show where he first encountered Bell. He was arrested in August 2003, charged with lewd acts upon a child, and pleaded no contest in 2004. The victim's name had been sealed in the proceedings, and Bell had never spoken publicly about it until this moment. He told the filmmakers afterward that a weight had been lifted from him after filming the interview, and in March 2024, he entered rehab. A separate production assistant named Jason Handy had also been prosecuted for child sex abuse in connection with work he had done on Nickelodeon sets. Schneider refused to appear in the documentary. His responses were communicated through text and shown on screen throughout the series. 2 days after the premiere, on March 19, 2024, he published a 19-minute YouTube video, an interview conducted by Boogle, an actor who had played a recurring character named Tebow on iCarly. The choice to have a former cast member conduct the interview, rather than a journalist or a neutral party, was not lost on people who watched it, since it meant Schneider was essentially controlling the entire conversation from both sides. In the video, Schneider said watching the documentary had been very difficult, that he was facing his past behaviors, that some of them were embarrassing and that he regretted them.
Some of which are embarrassing and that I regret, and I definitely owe some people a pretty strong apology.
He said he definitely owed some people a pretty strong apology, that he could see the hurt in some people's eyes, and it made him feel awful and regretful and sorry. He also said he wished he could go back and never let himself feel like it was okay to be an asshole to anyone, ever.
It was wrong that I ever put anybody in that position. It was the wrong thing to do. I'd never do it today. I'm embarrassed that I did it then. I apologize to anybody that I ever put in that situation.
He also said he was calling for some of the jokes in his old shows to be cut from reruns, and addressed the writer's room allegations by saying no writer should ever feel uncomfortable in any writer's room, period.
No writer should ever feel uncomfortable in any writer's room, ever, period, the end, no excuses.
But the reaction from former cast members made clear that a YouTube video had not been enough. Brian Hearn, one of the All That cast members who had appeared in the documentary, responded to the apology video directly, saying, "If I could be candid, Dan was an actor before all of this, and so I think that he brushed off some chops and gave us a nice performance. Where was all this apologizing when Jeanette McCurdy's book came out?" Alexa Nicholas, whose experience in Zoe 101 had been one of the documentary's central threads, live-streamed her reaction to the video on YouTube and said directly, "I do not forgive Dan Schneider." She accused him of playing the victim and criticized his decision to conduct the interview with a former cast member, rather than issuing private apologies to the people he had actually affected. She had founded a protest organization called Eat Predators and showed no sign of softening her position. Christy Strand, for her part, still declined to speak in the record about the incident in the writer's room when the documentary's producers asked. The 2018 Viacom-CBS investigation had found no evidence of sexual misconduct. No criminal charges had been filed against Schneider, and the two convicted sex offenders in the documentary were Peck and Handy, not Schneider. But by March 2024, that distinction had largely stopped mattering to the people watching. 2 months after the documentary premiered, in May 2024, Schneider filed a defamation lawsuit against Warner Bros., Discovery, Sony Pictures Television, and the documentary's directors Mary Robertson and Emma Schwartz.
Dan Schneider, the former showrunner of some of Nickelodeon's biggest shows and focus of the hard-hitting docuseries Quiet on the Set, is now suing the producers for defamation.
His legal team called the series a hit job and argued that through its editing, its framing, and its decision to repeatedly place Schneider alongside footage involving convicted offenders, Peck and Handy, the documentary had falsely implied to viewers that Schneider himself was a child sexual predator. Warner Bros., Discovery, and Sony moved immediately to have the case thrown out under California's anti-SLAPP statute, which is designed to block lawsuits intended to silence protected speech in matters of public concern. They argued that the documentary had never accused Schneider of sexual abuse directly, that it had clearly distinguished him from the individuals who had been convicted, and that no reasonable reading of the series concluded that Schneider himself had committed sexual crimes. The judge initially appeared to agree. Judge Ashfaq G. Chowdhury noted that Schneider had not submitted any evidence that the alleged defamatory statements were actually false, writing that Schneider does not come forward with any evidence as to the falsity of the alleged defamation. That prompted Schneider's lawyers to act quickly, filing a personal declaration from Schneider himself, asserting under oath that he had never sexually assaulted or sexually abused a child. On November 22, 2024, the judge reversed course and ruled that the lawsuit could proceed, finding that a reasonable viewer might conclude the documentary made damning implications about his conduct, and that the case had at least minimal merit. The lawsuit Schneider filed to clear his name had required him to personally swear in a court filing that he had never sexually abused a child, and that declaration became its own news cycle all over again. People who had moved on from the story found themselves back in it, with the oath declaration gathering a new round of coverage across news outlets and social media that the lawsuit had been intended to shut down. As of late 2025, the case was still moving through discovery with no resolution completion in sight, and no new television project had materialized. The pilot he had reportedly written and sold to a different network in 2021, before the documentary, before the lawsuit, had never been publicly announced or produced. No network had come forward with any new deal, and the silence from the industry was total. Since his 19-minute YouTube apology in March 2024, Schneider has gone almost entirely dark. No new shows, no studio deals, no public appearances, and no meaningful social media presence. The iCarly reboot had run on Paramount Plus from 2021 to 2023 without him, giving him only a created by credit, and was eventually cancelled. A Victorious spin-off called Hollywood Arts was being developed at Netflix, also moving forward without him. His name appeared nowhere in any active production at any network or streaming service. The stars he had built were everywhere. Ariana Grande, who had gotten her start playing Cat Valentine on Victorious when she was 16, starred in Wicked in 2024. Miranda Cosgrove announced an iCarly movie was in development.
Yes, I'm excited. We're going to film a movie early next year.
Jeanette McCurdy's memoir was being adapted as an Apple TV Plus series with Jennifer Aniston attached as both star and executive producer, announced in July 2025. Drake Bell had entered rehab after filming his documentary interview and spoken publicly about the weight that had lifted from him once he told his story on camera. Bell later said in a March 2024 appearance on the Sarah Fraser Show podcast that going to rehab was a direct result of finally telling his story in the documentary. Meanwhile, the shows themselves are still streaming, still being watched, but the way people were watching them had changed entirely. YouTube channels and TikTok accounts dedicated to cataloging the uncomfortable content in Schneider's work had accumulated thousands of views. Reddit threads asking how decades of this had gone unaddressed were drawing tens of thousands of responses. The Nickelodeon nostalgia that had been one of the defining shared experiences of millennial and Gen Z childhoods had been replaced, for a lot of people, with something harder to sit with. As of April 2026, no network, streaming platform, or production company has publicly announced a deal with Dan Schneider. His website still hosts the statement he released when he filed the defamation lawsuit. He has not been charged with a crime and he has not been convicted of anything. What he has been is something the entertainment industry has its own quiet understanding of. He has been made unemployable, and nobody is saying it out loud because nobody needs to. Dan Schneider spent 25 years at Nickelodeon, building something that had no equivalent in children's television. The talent pipeline he ran produced careers that are still going. The cultural footprint of those shows is real, and it is not going away. And the people who grew up watching iCarly, Drake and Josh, Victorious, and Zoe 101 are not pretending otherwise. But the machine he built ran on something else alongside the creativity, and what it ran on was power that nobody checked, freedom that nobody limited, and a culture around him where the people most harmed by the environment he created were the least positioned to say anything about it while it was happening. As of 2026, Dan Schneider is not in prison. No criminal charges have ever been filed, but he is something the entertainment industry treats as its own kind of permanent consequence. He's done. Not in the internet sense of canceled and eventually forgotten, done in the industry sense, where no phone calls come, no meetings get scheduled, no projects get greenlit, and the silence itself is the answer. The 25 years he spent at the top didn't survive contact with the people who had been there for all of it.